Hacking is certainly not a crime. Hacking is taking something and...
Is there any one particular misconception about cybersecurity?
When you're trying to do something on a consistent basis, you make sacrifices. Everyone, including people in the industry, often confuse privacy and security.
I just really wanted the world to hear from people who've been there, done that.
We can do this. We just have to come together as communities, establish good standards, and make sure that average people don't have to think about it.
Things might have ended up quite differently for us.
I need to see where you're going. I need to see what you're doing. I need to see what's inside those packets.
Any personal sacrifice that you made at any point in time?
98% of everything going in and out of our network is encrypted.
Number one, commitment. And number two, low expectations.
If there's an infected computer on the internet, it's still going to sweep the entire internet every day.
I was involved in setting up a South African investment bank.
Choose wisely, because it's a big investment.
I'm super excited for what's coming.
You could dial into their systems to access the...
Deep in the digital shadows, where threats hide behind any random byte, a fearless crew of cybersecurity warriors guards the line between chaos and order. Their epic battles, rarely spoken of until today. Welcome to the Defender's Log, where we crack open the secrets of top security chiefs, CISOs, and architects who faced the abyss and won. Here's your host, David Redekop.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Defender's Log, episode number 1. This is where we have conversations with people who live in the cybersecurity defender space and have stories to share. On this very first episode, I'm very thrilled to have my friend Chet Wisniewski with me.
It's always good to talk with you, David.
Well, good to have you, and I'm glad you're able to set aside some time to chat with me in this very exciting, very dynamic space. You and I have both been in this for some time. I just really wanted the world to hear from people who've been there, done that, because as much as you and I enjoy the work that we're in, I'm not sure that there's enough of the next generation that is taking an interest. And I'm only speaking from the perspective of me speaking to young folk today, like our sons, and none of them have any interest in being in this space. And I can't understand why, because it's a pure adventure. So that's partly what I'll need your help with. Thanks for joining, and I'm glad that we could connect.
Yeah, no, it's always good to talk with you, David. And it is, I consider it a fascinating space. I mean, I think the reason I've stayed in it so long is that every morning it's different than the day before, because it moves so fast and there's so much change all the time, which maybe, for some people, I guess that's scary. But for me, it's the most fascinating thing ever, because I get bored easily. The criminals don't let any grass grow under their feet, and when our money turned digital and, there's an opportunity to steal it, they're not going to stop anytime soon. There's plenty of work to do.
That's been my experience as well, is that we can't sit still. Like there's this real bad asymmetry that I find between the defenders and the adversaries. And you would know this better than anyone in your capacity, but we always find that the good guys have to find every single hole and every single weakness and every single vulnerability and every single exploitable thing in any way. But the bad guys, they have an unfair advantage in that sense that they only need to find one.
I don't know if I agree with that exactly, though, because, the attackers have a whole chain of things they need to get past these days, right? Like you think about the layers and defense in depth that we've built around most of our critical assets, or hopefully we have. I mean, too often we're hearing in the headlines about organizations that haven't necessarily had strong layers of defense, and therefore we're getting our 8th breach letter of the year for our information being stolen. But the truth is, if we're doing this well, I don't think we're at such a disadvantage anymore. And actually, I think AI is an interesting topic on this too, because I think the good guys have a dramatic advantage over the bad guys when it comes to this particular technology. I think about my network here at my house, and it's like, well, first you've got to find a way to get past my firewall. And then even if you stole my passwords, I've got monitoring, I've got XDR, I've got lots of different things going on where none of those technologies are perfect. So which means any of them can be bypassed. But to get my information, you kind of have to bypass all of them, right? Like you've got to get past all the layers and me not noticing that you're there. So you've got to do it quietly as well. In a well-monitored network, I think it's quite formidable.
Well, okay. So you and I are going to disagree on some things, but I think you've already convinced me that if you do defense in depth properly, that you're basically turning that what used to be an unfair adversarial advantage to be your own advantage. So I buy that. But before we get into the technical things, which I'm really excited to chat with you about because of the space that we live and work in, I would like the folks who are going to watch and listen to this to learn a little bit about Chet. Tell us a little bit about your background. What got you into this space? How did you get started? Before the internet and cybersecurity was even a thing.
I got involved. Ultimately, I started on this journey in the mid 80s on bulletin boards and BBSs. I lived in a very rural area, and I spent a lot of time at home with my Commodore 64. I think I got a modem in 1983, maybe 1984, something like that. But because I lived in a really rural place, at least in the U.S. where I grew up, you can make local phone calls for free. But of course, local phone calls, I mean, the cows didn't have phones. There wasn't really anybody to call, much to speak of. So I always wanted to connect to the BBSs in the big cities. But of course, back in those days, AT&T was still a monopoly in the U.S. And if you can imagine 12 cents a minute or it's probably more like 25 cents a minute in current dollars, that's like $1 a minute or more that you'd have to pay to call long distance. And somebody kind of turned me on to the fact that maybe the phone network wasn't so secure and you might be able to make some free phone calls if you messed around with the phone network a bit. That caught my interest. I don't recommend stealing from the phone company, but certainly made some connections but I started kind of figuring out that, all these, at the time, the phone network was the world's largest computer. I mean, you think about it, it was the only thing connected to just about every country in the world, and certainly in developed countries, every house in the world. It's pretty amazing network when you think about how does this thing work. If you're starting to try to manipulate the phone network to make a free phone call, you have to understand how it works, and you're starting to realize this massive, amazing, impressive computer and programming that goes into operating it. And I think that sparked my curiosity that's led me all the way through my journey to where I am now.
Wow. So you really were there at the beginning. Like, I didn't even know that you could get modems for Commodore 64s.
Oh yeah, the first one I had
Are
was
you
an
serious?
acoustic coupler that you had to take the old
Wow.
handset and put it on the suction cups, and then I got another one that later that you had to switch on, so you had to dial over the actual phone still, but then you could just flick a little slider switch on the back and it would engage the 300 baud
Wow.
modem. And then much later we got the auto dialing modems, and then it was like, oh wow, like the thing can dial on its own. Except where I lived, our phone exchange was so old. In fact, to this day, that area, I was just there a few weeks ago, they still have a 1930s era phone exchange in that community. So no touch tone calling, no 911, none of these fancy
Wow.
things, which made it easier to bypass.
Right. Wow. That's fascinating to me because I remember at the University of Waterloo, my first year in 1990, that it was just a few years prior that it was still one of the only mainframe computers in Canada at the Waterloo campus. Then, of course, computer labs spread out very quickly, and then they came online and so forth. So to me, it seemed like it happened really fast, but obviously there's much more of a history.
I think I first accessed the internet similarly, not as a student, but the University of Michigan in Michigan was a huge part of building the modern internet. And so they had connectivity in the late 80s, and anybody could ask them for an account, and they would give you an account if you could dial into their systems to access the internet. So I think I got online, like what we would now consider the internet. It was probably still called ARPANET back then, in like 1987, would have been 87, 88, around that
Right.
time, when it was just starting to be called the internet. You could access it through the big university computers, which was really cool.
I'm curious as to at what point did you experience the very first time that you felt that this ubiquitous connectivity, well, as non-ubiquitous as it was, even just universities and those very interested in the magic of connectivity, at what point did you first detect that there was going to be a malicious kind of activity around this that you took an interest in observing? happening.
It was kind of obvious all along that there was going to be problems, but I guess when none of us envisioned that the entire world's financial networks would be written, layered on top of it, which obviously changed the dynamic changed a few times along the way, right? Because I was always interested in, I can't believe back to, even in the, logging in the University of Michigan systems in the late 80s, it gave me access to early IRC internet relay chat rooms and things like that. And already you're just seeing that people choose garbage passwords. There's systems everywhere with no passwords. This could only end in tears. Everything is so poorly built and so poorly managed and secured. And of course, because it sprung out of academia in those early years, in the early 90s, academia's view was, well, information should be free and knowledge should be shared, and who cares? These systems don't matter. Why should we lock somebody out of them if they might learn something? Which is a
Right.
beautiful attitude to have, but it's wholly unrealistic in the world we live in now, isn't it? And so I think there were two pivotal moments that completely changed information security, if you want to call it that. One was around 95, 96, when Kevin Mitnick was in the news for his crimes that he was committing. Suddenly the world had heard of this thing called a hacker, and it wasn't just a movie with, what's his name, Matthew Broderick.
Right.
And, it was a bit of a real thing. And the New York Times got hacked. And so because the New York Times got hacked, of course, the New York Times wrote about the New York Times being hacked. So everybody knew about it. And it started becoming a thing that all these computers are on the internet and they belong to these mega powerful, rich businesses. And if they get hacked, there's obviously, this is bad. We should do something about this. There weren't really information security jobs outside of the military and government to speak of, and maybe universities again, academia. But in the private sector, it wasn't much of a job that you could get until around that time, when suddenly, oh, wow, these things can get hacked. And then the second pivotal moment was probably about 1999-ish, when we all started getting Viagra spams and Russian brides, and email spam became the first profitable e-crime as far as I'm concerned. There was no way to make money off of these crimes before. Kevin Mitnick was a nuisance. He wasn't making money. And even hacking the New York Times and a lot of this stuff, it was just people showing off and causing harm, but not for personal gain, just showing that they knew more than the defenders did. And suddenly, when the Russians figured out that Canadian pharmacies based in St. Petersburg was profitable, and that everybody's mailboxes were insecure and they could just take over any mail server in the world and just send millions of messages for pennies, it changed everything. Once money got involved, it changed everything.
Right. It didn't hurt them that the SendMail default installation was that it was an open relay, right? Accepting email from anybody, willing to send it off to anybody. Because I remember how quickly we had to, around that time, start patching default SendMail configurations that were exposed to the public internet.
And that was assuming your SendMail was up to date enough to not have an earlier vulnerability that gave root access by just talking to SendMail. So,
Right.
I mean, SendMail had a long history of
Right.
dodgy configurations and a pretty bad security posture that goes back to its invention, basically in the early 90s. So those CF files, it was horrible.
You were talking about Mitnick and just being a nuisance. Did you ever come across the Monkey A and Monkey B viruses? I think it was those two series.
In my early days, I was all on Commodore and Unix stuff. So I was all on the Amigas, and then I did a lot of NetBSD and a lot of Unix things. And so I didn't pay attention to Windows viruses that much until they became super wormable, when we all got hit with Melissa and I Love You and all that kind of stuff, which I think was 99 and 2000. So the really early stuff, I mean, I'd heard about it, and there were some Amiga viruses I got on some of my diskettes and things, but I wasn't a big virus guy until kind of the real famous ones started hitting big time. Because I remember what you're talking about. There was Jerusalem. There was a bunch of mid 90s ones, but I wasn't really in the scene then.
I remember at the time people asking us, why would anybody do this? And the answer was just because we could, right? The bad guys. That would be their response.
Well, some of them had political messages. I mean, there was an early one that was a macro virus that inserted messages into Microsoft Word documents that said, end all French nuclear testing. There was a smattering of sort of politically motivated early viruses. A lot of it was just to see what people could, a lot of people were just experimenting to see what they could do.
In your work today, do you still come across any remaining NIMDA or MS Blast
I'd
packets
have to
that you
look.
observe?
I know we're still seeing a ton of Eternal Blue. We're still
Oh,
seeing
yes.
Conficker. These things never go away, and with the amount of telemetry we have, I would be really, really surprised if we're not seeing some My Doom and some, SQL Slammer, or, I mean, these things never really go away. I mean, if there's a infected computer on the internet, it's still going to sweep the entire internet every day trying to find something else to infect. And we have about just under 700,000 firewalls out there sending us telemetry. So I would be shocked if there's anything that's active that we're not seeing, but it's not something that comes up all that often. But Eternal Blue, there's still a ton of it out there.
Is there any one particular misconception about cybersecurity that you would want to communicate to defenders or the public today that you think are commonly misunderstood?
Everyone, including people in the industry, often confuse privacy and security and lump them together. And they're really quite different things. And in this climate that we're in right now, where many governments are talking about wanting to backdoor encrypted chat programs, the changes politically going on in the United States, there's a lot of turmoil right now out there and a lot of discussion around online privacy. And I think it's an interesting challenge, right? Because like if you're a company trying to protect your users, if your users have privacy, then ultimately it makes it harder to protect them. So security and privacy don't always go together. Because if I want to inspect things to know if they're bad or dangerous for you, that means I need to break into them. I need to see where you're going. I need to see what you're doing. I need to see what's inside those packets. Is there something malicious in there? Is there a URL that you're going to a phishing website? Well, if I know you're going to a phishing website, I also know you're going to an adult content website. And I also know you're going to your bank. And I also know that you're shopping for your Father's Day present. Some interesting moral and ethical challenges we face as practitioners, I think, to decide what is it okay for us to break into and look at and what isn't. Because in the pursuit of security, you'd want to break into everything and look at all the stuff. But I think we all probably agree that that's bad. There ought to be some boundaries around some things. And the question of where those boundaries lie is very complicated. I don't think people think enough about that. And I think security people I know don't think enough about, when they're providing people advice, what is the actual threat for the person you're providing the advice to, right? I was visiting my mom and my uncle 2 weeks ago. They're quite elderly. They don't know much about computers. When I have 5 minutes with them, what do I tell them? Do I tell them that their password should be 35 characters with an exclamation point and a ampersand? Do I tell them that the Wi-Fi at the mall is scary? Do I tell them not to plug their phone in at the airport because it might be juice jacking? Probably not. I don't think I tell them any of those things. I probably tell them to use different passwords everywhere and write them down in a notebook. And I wouldn't give that advice to my 25-year-old niece. The things that when we give people advice, we need to give it within the context of who they are and what their threat model is. And if your threat model is a nation state, then the advice you get is very, very different than if your threat model is a commodity scammer who's trying to convince you that they're Toronto Dominion Bank and that you should give them your password.
Would you then agree with this notion that many of us today that live in the defender's world, if we had been born and raised in a complete criminal community, that the same curiosity, the same hunger for understanding how things work, that things might have ended up quite differently for us?
I think this is happening every day in our high schools and middle schools, right? Most kids that learn how to reverse engineer software do it so they can cheat in a video game. That's an amazing motivation for them. And they're actually learning an incredibly useful skill. Like if you can figure out how to break into Counter-Strike and cheat, you can use that same skill to break into computer software, and you could be a penetration tester. And there's a fork in the road for those kids at some point where they realize, I can steal these other things and make money, or I could use these skills to stop other people and have a career or a job or opportunities to make the world a safer and more secure place. And I think that battle's going on in Discord chat rooms while we're recording. I think there's a lot of interesting initiatives going on. I'm not actually aware of any here in Canada at the moment, but I do know in the US and in the UK and in Australia, there's a lot of programs now starting to try to help point that out to kids when they're making those choices and go, look, sure, you could steal, but Do you know how much money a penetration tester makes? Like, you could do this for the good guys and have a pretty secure future.
I'm wondering if you speak of a community overall, because it really is about the collective influence of a number. And I had the same, but is there any one particular most influential mentor that really would have been the strongest, or a strong form of influence that either chose you or that either influenced you to make a choice for legitimate defense, or utilizing it for a greater common good?
Certainly early in my career at Sophos, even 20 plus years ago, Paul Ducklin, who's a dear friend of mine and a long time industry guy, for people that work in security, you may be familiar with the ICAR test file that you use to test an antivirus system.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Paul wrote that as a college student in South Africa back in the early 1990s. Paul was an enormous influence on my modern career, I would say, and that he's a no bullshit guy. And the point of everything is to leave the world better than you found it, to not hype things, and to help people understand. You might not be able to explain a software vulnerability to them, but help them understand how these things impact their lives and how to make choices to be more secure. And he's just been such an amazing positive force in the world and a great role model that way. And really, from the very beginning of my opportunities working with journalists and media, established this, unshakable foundation that we have to be a voice of reason and not fan the flames of hype, and help people truly understand how to make choices to be safe, and not to do it for personal profit or fame or glory or to be the InfoSec rock star. That's not the purpose of this. The purpose is to leave the world better than you found it.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I will definitely express my appreciation towards Paul as well, because I have used that download hundreds, if not thousands of times for various tests. I'm wondering if you can reference any personal sacrifice that you made at any point in time at the front lines of cybersecurity. And we know sleep is definitely one of them, but what would be like your most sacrificial moment in pursuit of your line of defense?
In a lot of cases, I've had a lot of opportunities to go into other jobs and roles that would have paid me a lot of money personally, or possibly made me wealthy as being a part of a new company or a startup. And I didn't feel that work was important as the work I'm doing. And so, I've been in my current job it'll be 22 years this summer. That's a long time in this business to be in one spot. And unlike yourself, I'm not a founder or a co-founder of the company. I mean, obviously when it's your own baby, it's a little easier to have a long term in an organization, right? But as a contributor, and now I'm a leader within Sophos, that's a long time to be in one spot. And along the path, there's been many times where, I've had opportunities to do other possibly more personally beneficial things, but I recognize the amazing spot in the role that I have allows me to have so much influence on making that world a safer place. And I genuinely believe it, that I've kind of foregone things that might have been very profitable, but probably a far less important.
We're certainly very grateful for the good choices that you made, because in our industry, when we have industry standards to reference to say, here's a person who's played a significant role and showed that churn wasn't necessarily part of the journey, that you can pick strategically. I remember a video that I just watched yesterday about a guy who talks about a successful marriage. He says it only takes two ingredients. It takes, number one, commitment, and number two, low expectations. And if you have those two, you'll have a successful marriage. And in a way, it's almost like that with cybersecurity. I find that if you have low expectations any given day, that it will be there for the long haul. But yeah, I do have another question for you, that two actually that came to mind as you were sharing. I remember a long time ago when Astaro was still a separate company. Is there anything there that you were involved in when Astaro, which we were huge fans of, by the way?
I was too.
And I remember Yeah. Oh, that's right. So, well, I have a quick story for it to tell you then. I was involved in setting up a South African investment bank with 6 Astero units so that they would operate in high availability in 3 different networks. And that was my first real wow, you can actually have security and stability at the same time. So, is there anything about that event, the Astero acquisition, that you are part of?
A colleague of mine, Chris Kraft, who I think is with Arctic Wolf now, but at the time we were working together at Sophos, and he was tasked with finding a firewall vendor that was interesting to purchase, because we knew we didn't want to start from the ground up, but we wanted to get better network visibility and get into the network security side of things more. He had kind of come up to me with the menu of, what do you think of these 4 vendors? And I looked at the list and I'm like, Astero. And he's like, really? I'm like, yeah, no,
Wow.
I've played with all of them, and Astero, like I was using
Wow.
it at home at the time because they had a free home use license, and I was using it on my own hardware at home, and I was very familiar with it, and I knew the quality to be exceptional. And I was like, yeah, there's no question, just buy the Astero one. And that's a few weeks later we went forward with the transaction. But and I
Wow.
believe the last Astero based firewall is going end of life this month. So we still have that product line in support,
Wow.
but it is, I don't recommend buying one today, because I think the end of life is the end of this month, is an official end of life, where I think it gets another year of updates or something, but it's still around.
Well, I've deployed my share of them in the world of Canadian brands. I'm definitely proud of every deployment that we've ever done. So kudos to you and that role. If you could go back and give your younger self any one piece of advice, what would that be?
Do as many of the things as possible to figure out which is the thing that is going to really light your lamp and get you excited and want to do things. In the mid 90s, I was working for a network integrator, and I kept overhearing this guy in the room down the hall having conversations with customers. And this is before we really had the modern term of sales engineer, but that's what the job kind of was, really. It was a network architect kind of thing, where you would work with the customer to design a solution for them. And then if they bought it, somebody else would go in and install all the stuff and set it up and things. But I wish I had done that earlier, which was, I was hearing that guy. And after he was done, after a couple of days, I walked down the hall and I said, who are you? And he goes, oh, I'm Jim. I said, hi, Jim. I want your job. Like, what is this that you're doing? And what do I have to do to be sitting in that chair next year doing that? Like, guide me, mentor me, teach me, show me, whatever, however you want to say that, right? I wish I had thought of that, or had gone that path steps earlier. Ask for help, ask for mentors, find somebody who's doing something that sounds super fun and exciting that you're really motivated by, and just go ask them.
It is quite common in our industry from folks that I've talked to, where not having a university degree was not a hindrance to getting really meaningful work. And that was because I sensed that our industry was in such rapid flux that we were able to adapt fast, if not faster than academia could at the time. And I see that pattern repeating itself. Like, it used to be like that with accounting, where you didn't need a university degree to be an accountant. Eventually you had to. It was much more regulated. And then it was like that with actuarial science still in the 90s. I don't know if it is still like that today, where as long as you passed your actuarial science exams, you would have the equivalent of a university degree. And still to this day, I sense that a lot of defenders and even adversarial emulations, red teamers, are looking for the ability to think like an adversary and to defend like a defender as being the more important attribute. So,
Well, yeah, and this career didn't exist when I started. I mean, like, if I could have got started in information security in the early 90s when I started my career, I would have done it, but these jobs didn't even exist. And so that was why I had to do other things, networking and other computer tasks, until this kind of developed into being an industry. But then when it did become a real job, at that point, there still weren't really any college degrees or anything outside of the fantastic program at Purdue. I mean, if people are if you want a formal education and you really want it to be awesome in information security, you have to go to West Lafayette, Indiana, to Purdue University's serious program started by Gene Spafford in the 90s. There are very few computer security programs out there that I would give the time of day, to be honest. Most of them are trying to capitalize on the interest
Right.
in employment in our industry and the high wages and the alleged shortage of people. And that is not Purdue's program. It is an amazing program. I've had the pleasure of guest lecturing down there, and in fact, Gene was just promoted to distinguished professor at Purdue, which is quite an
Wow.
accomplishment for Gene. That is an amazing program. UC San Diego has an amazing program. UT's program is rating quite well these days as well, I think.
My wife and I, we have this conversation very frequently about the value of academia. And my response usually is the lawyery type, well, it depends. And then a whole bunch of dependencies on when academic credits really do matter and when they might not.
Oh, it's like certifications,
yeah.
right? I get asked constantly by students about what certifications they should pursue. And it's like, it's a tough question because some of them matter in some things more than others. It depends on where your career is going to go, right? And they're expensive. And just like, I mean, college is expensive. Certifications are expensive. Choose wisely, because it's a big investment.
If you came to this podcast looking for a very specific certification answer, now the Chet and I have an answer for you. But yes, be hungry and choose wisely is what I would say as well. Is there any one particular most rewarding moment that you've experienced as a defender?
I used to have a podcast that I did for many years for Sophos called the Sophos Security Chat, and I did about 300 episodes over the course of, I don't know, 7-8 years. I didn't realize how influential that was on so many people's decision making for how to protect and secure their organizations until I stopped doing it. And but like the number of times I would like walking around at RSA, I think I met you for the very first time at RSA,
Yes.
probably 6 or 7 years ago. People will be like, "Hey, are you?" That you'll see my badge hanging with my name in giant print like you have at RSA, right? And they're like, "Oh, Chet from Sophos, are you the guy from the podcast?" Because I didn't do video on my podcast, people wouldn't recognize me, but they recognize my name. Be like, "Are you the guy?" Oh yeah, I used to listen to that, and it, like all these different things that it helped me clarify and understand that I did to protect my organization, and I didn't recognize how much of an impact that had on so many people. Having these types of conversations where we're being genuine, we're talking about real problems, we're talking about practical things, and how to soberly assess the risk of something and make a good judgment about it is not it's unfortunately uncommon, apparently.
Yeah.
And
Right.
when you do that, it has this enormous ripple effect in people's careers and lives and decision making, and it's really amazing. And I mean, I've even had the opportunity from that I've gotten hired to give some talks privately at businesses and things for rather handsome sums of money, off the back of like, you're a trustworthy person with credibility, and that we believe will truly influence people to do security better. And that's pretty cool.
That's awesome. Congratulations. I mean, I did not realize you had done that many episodes. I knew of
While
the podcast.
I was on airplanes and in hotels in 35 countries, it was a lot to do, as you'll find doing the podcast. I mean, you've got much nicer recording setup and things than I certainly had. I think I did at least a dozen episodes from Air Canada Maple Leaf lounges. So when you're trying to do something on a consistent basis, you make sacrifices.
Well, now that you mentioned that, I'm not sure how sacrificial I will be, because I can imagine even earlier when I asked you about sacrificial moments, you never mentioned how committed you were to doing podcasts while you're on the road. But we are living a day today where that technology is possible. So I'm super excited for what's coming, and I'm really glad I was able to connect with you today. Is there anything that you want to leave our listeners with in terms of wisdom or nugget of advice on cyber defense?
I think we're too negative in this business, and I think that's something we need to carefully think about. And maybe that's why you mentioned youth not coming or expressing as much interest. Well, as much as we complain about mental health stress, burnout, it is a high pressure responsibility. To be a CISO today, you've got lawyers and boards and regulators and criminals all coming for you. It's a lot. And maybe that just dissuades a lot of people. But I also think there's a lot of negativity in our industry that we're losing these fights and that there's nothing we can do about it, and nobody's going to arrest the Russians, and they're just going to keep coming and stealing and robbing us blind, and ransomware is inevitable, and what am I supposed to do? We consider anything that gets past our defense as a loss, and it's just not true, right? Because the being successful is detecting it early, not preventing everything. We can't prevent everything. I mean, as much as I masked and avoided human beings, I got COVID. But once I got COVID, I went to the doctor and I got Paxlovid, and I did something about it to try to minimize the harm and risk to my body of this bad disease. And it's no different. Like, just because we can't prevent 100% of attacks doesn't mean we failed. The goal is to try to prevent 90%, and then the 10% that we don't, detect them in an hour, not a week. And if you detect them in an hour, it's the equivalent of catching a mild cold as opposed to a deadly disease. If we are a little easier on ourselves and stop being as negative about losing as much, I actually think we're making an enormous amount of progress. And 10 years ago, Ed Snowden told us that the government was listening to everything we did on the internet. Here we are, 98% of everything going in and out of our network is encrypted. And my mom didn't have to do a single thing. It just happened. We did it perfectly. It's in the background. It's automatic. You don't have to think about it. You're suddenly safe. We can do this. We just have to come together as communities, establish good standards, and make sure that average people don't have to think about it, that it's just there for them.
That's a good, solid wisdom right there, is that we can do this, we can do better, and we can present it as a positive environment. Because really it is about problem solving, right? And there is a real sense of reward in doing problem solving. So you certainly gave me lots to think about today. Chet, I don't know if you have any particular upcoming events, because I know you were the keynote at the B-Sides just a few weeks ago. Do you have anything coming up where people can find you?
No, nothing in the real short term. Although I will be at Black Hat and DEF CON. If people want to say hi, they can reach out to me on social media, on LinkedIn, and I'd be happy to meet up for a coffee or a brew somewhere in 45-degree Las Vegas. And in October, you can see me in London at the Gartner Summit. And you can also see me in Santiago, Chile. But I don't know that your listeners are likely to find me in Santiago or London per se. But I do hang out on Mastodon and post there and on LinkedIn when I'm speaking at events.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to look you up in Vegas again, but definitely not in the heat and definitely not to gamble. So
Sounds like a plan.
We'll connect. Thanks very much for joining me today. Appreciate it very much, Chet.
No problem.
Take care.
Good to see you, David. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
The Defender's Log requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.